meaning across scales. So what can we say about meaning's complexification then? Throughout this book, I have endeavored to show how meaning has indeed grown richer and more informationally rich across cosmic evolution. Though meaning ultimately stems from the existential requirement to resist entropic dissolution, emergent meanings of complex entities clearly cannot be simplistically reduced to this foundation, but recognized as qualitatively transforming as complexity increases. As meaning has complexified from matter to life to mind, new layers added upon existing ones, building upon previous developments. New kinds of entity-field relationships formed with new kinds of information to process and to interpret for meaning. In this way, genetic meanings gave rise to neuronal meanings, which, for one group of primates with exceptional neuronal complexity, eventually gave rise to language and the domain of symbolic meaning, the stuff of culture. Along the way, meaningful concerns and behaviors proliferated, beginning as a purely thermodynamic imperative to materially persist. Meaning deepened into complex organisms to goal-directed behavior of energy capture, self-maintenance, and reproduction. Then infinitely diversified through an explosion of mobile animals normatively navigating a vast possibility space by means of increasingly complex mental models. All this eventually gave rise to, and plays out within, an inner world of subjective experience, wherein normative values became felt as qualia states for a persisting experiential self, which in time led to social selves, in-group dynamics, sensitive to complex social relationships of all sorts. Language both reframed meanings from previous levels and opened up entirely new domains of meaningful experience. For instance, it aided humans' continued material existence by enriching our mental models with abstract concepts, whose patterns dramatically increase our competencies for action and thus our viability. It enhanced and deepened social relationships through intersubjective communication, collective problem-solving, and shared group goals, all of which reshaped sexual relationships and power hierarchies. In these and a million other ways, language transfigured meanings from earlier levels of matter, life, and mind. But it also opens up entirely new realms of meaning unique to the level of culture, as language gives rise to the concept of an egoic self, a theory of mind, and entirely abstract concepts, such that meaning can now unfold through self-awareness, relationship to other selves, and the vast horizon of human reflection, from philosophy to logic to religion to science and beyond. With language, the full range of human meaning becomes possible. Jumping back to our primary sense of meaning discussed at the outset, that of semantic information as what aids an entity in resisting entropy, we see that a through line does indeed run from it all the way to the rich and diverse activities of cultural life that we ourselves actually tend to identify as meaningful and valuable in the common colloquial sense. However, to be clear once more in case there is any lingering confusion, this is not at all to suggest that human meaning can simply be reduced to a survival imperative, any more than human anatomy can be reduced to the skeleton, or the contents of a book reduced simply to the paper upon which it is written. Rather, this through line simply shows how, without the skeleton, the body cannot stand, and without the paper, the book cannot be read. From a secure naturalistic foundation of meaning in thermodynamic principles, we have thus been able to build up a successively more complex set of layers spanning multiple novel information processing systems, which are dependent upon, but not reducible to, the substrates from which they arise. By the time we reach the cultural level of human meaning, there is a rich tapestry of various semantic registers, interweaving symbolic, social, experiential, genetic, and other sources of meaningful information. Underpinning them all, however, is the same basic teleological and thus normative endeavor of the successfully persisting and enhancing viability of organisms. As physicist Carlo Rovelli put it in his 2018 paper, this most basic notion of meaning is the first link in a long chain of successively more complex meanings. The claim here, he says, is not that the full content of what we call intentionality, meaning, purpose, say in human psychology or linguistics, is nothing else than the meaningful information defined herein as thermodynamic viability, but it is that these notions can be built upon the notion of meaningful information, step by step, adding the articulation proper to our neural, mental, linguistic, social, etc. complexity. In other words, I'm not claiming to provide here the full chain from physics to mental, but rather the crucial first link of that chain. Rovelli distinguishes between direct and indirect meaning to reflect the difference of semantic information that has immediate causal bearing on viability in a thermodynamic sense, and that which only secondarily relates to it, for example by being relevant for obtaining more existentially relevant information. Obviously, he writes, not any manifestation of meaning, purpose, intentionality, or value is directly meaning. Reading today's newspaper is not likely to directly enhance mine or my genes' survival probability. This is the sense of the distinction between direct meaningful information and meaningful information more generally. The second includes all relative information, which in turn increases the probability of acquiring meaningful information. This opens the door to recursive growth of meaningful information and arbitrary increase of semantic complexity. It is this secondary recursive growth that grounds the use of meaningful information in the brain, starting with meaningful information in the sense defined here as what aids an entity in resisting entropy. We get something that looks more and more like the full notions of meaning that we use in various contexts, by adding articulations and moving up to contexts where there is a brain, language, society, norms. Over the course of this book, I have endeavored to do just that, to move up the various levels coupling entities to environmental contexts in more complex relationships, whereby more complex meaning is generated. By the time we reach the domain of culture and human symbolic meaning, we are in an intricate field indeed, where all sorts of information vie for attention and interpretation, both directly and indirectly. What all of this ultimately offers us is a robust theorization of human meaning and value, and a framework for understanding how and why these emerge and change. It allows us to see how, one, meaning in human culture constitutes a dynamic system of semantic information processing at multiple levels, linking the human person to material, biological, neuronal, and cultural realities. 2, these meanings play out in context in response to specific conditions that characterize the entity-field relationship. And 3, these meanings are subject to the continual revision of an ongoing learning process, whereby new information reduces uncertainty and reshapes beliefs and values. Such meanings, we see, constitute an unbroken chain that leads from the most rudimentary to the most lofty. At every level, meaning depends upon the various lower-order meanings that support it. Fostering social relationships, for instance, is rooted in the valence qualia of consciousness, which emerges from world modeling, which depends upon being alive, etc. The meanings unique to human culture are given here, however, admittedly little more than as placeholders for the discussion that will follow. It will be the aim of the remainder of this book to spell out more fully just what the evolution of human meaning and value actually looks like as culture complexifies. To get a better appreciation for how meaning can complexify in this way, let us look at a couple of examples. For this, we can use 2 profoundly meaningful issues operant at all scales of complexity, namely generation and annihilation. Such matters are obviously fundamental to the issue of viability. What I wish to show here is just how these meanings evolve through complexifying umwelts. Generation at the level of matter is basic and blunt. Nuclear force attraction draws protons and neutrons together, Gravity clumps hydrogen atoms, atoms amass as molecules, etc. Generation is brute and binary. It is or it is not. It happens or does not, the product of chance and determinism. Energy gradients push matter to self-organize as conditions allow, but structures dissolve as conditions change. At the level of life, generation becomes reproduction. Cells divide and duplicate, a marvel of organization that lets life's information live on. Indeed, that is the functional purpose of biological generation. Then, sometime around 2 billion years ago, sexual reproduction evolved, wherein two different living organisms come together to combine their DNA to create a third. On the complexity plane of life, sex is purely mechanical. The knowledge to sexually reproduce exists only within the genetic code of the differently sexed organisms. In flowering plants, for instance, the stamen is the male part that produces seed, and the pistil the female part with the ovary. Seed makes its way to the ovary by wind, pollinators, or other means. Sex is an unconscious and unexperienced act, as there is no nervous system to mediate consciousness or experience. This all changes at the level of mind, where sex becomes a behavior of animals. At this level, the meaning of sex becomes infinitely richer, as it is now overlaid with intense sensory valence qualia thanks to complex nervous systems. Generation becomes mating, operating in a whole new domain of behavioral rituals, performance, competition, etc. Sex becomes carnal and embodied, mediated through pheromones and desires. At less complex levels, the brute mechanical nature remains dominant. Some insects devour their mates, while some animals accidentally kill theirs in the forceful act of reproduction or the competition for it. The drive to reproduce is intense, compulsory, heedless. In more complex animals like mammals, mating is woven into the social dynamics of the group. It becomes attached to status, as in chimps, or the act is offered outside of reproductive purposes purely to serve social relationships, as in bonobos. At the level of culture, sex deepens even further in its manifestation among self-conscious persons. Symbolic communication opens intersubjective channels for a novel kind of immediacy and intimacy between egoic individuals unseen in the animal world. The complexities of language allow the idiosyncratic nature of personality to become a factor in selection. Brains, and not just brawn, become important. In colloquial terms, animal lust is overlaid with human love, such that a profound reciprocity of mutual care and satisfaction can now exist. Sex attains a spiritual depth, but it is also refracted through cultural taboos and societal norms. The typical physical sex distinctions of animals, male-female, get an overlay of cultural gender constructs, masculine-feminine, performed or subverted differently across contexts. Sex can be play, punishment, heaven or hell, rape or rapture. In short, the meaning of sex to a human in the 21st century is quite different compared to that of, say, a dandelion, despite the continuity of the mechanism. Indeed, not only are there successive layerings of neuronal and symbolic information from the mind and culture levels, respectively, there are also intracultural layerings, as human symbolic learning has shifted cultural perceptions of sexuality over the millennia. Sex means something different to a postmodern woman than to a woman in a Neolithic forager society, a woman in a traditional agricultural society, etc. That it is meaningful has not changed. Only how it is meaningful has evolved. On the other end of the spectrum, annihilation can be addressed in similar terms. For matter, annihilation is simply the binary 0 to generations 1. Stars explode with all the mute indifference with which they form. Entropy is simply the way of things. For cellular life, waging its war against entropy, annihilation means death, its antithetical goal state. For cells, the avoidance of death is a reflex, an unconscious reaction triggered by a stimulus. The amoeba tracks to the left when it bumps up against the destructive chemical on its right. When dissolution does come, the specific system is lost, but near identical copies exist elsewhere. So life flourishes unconsciously and disappears into darkness just as unawares. For animals, death is profoundly different. Confronted by danger, there are feelings of fear, stress, and terror. An animal will struggle violently to preserve itself. All instincts marshal to survive. When death is finally imminent, it is painful. From the intimation, to the wound, to the final undoing, all qualia are negative. The animal suffers. Once dead, the unique aspect of that being, the product of all its experience, is lost to the world. Some social animals like apes and elephants seem to recognize this and appear to mourn in their way the unique character that has been lost. On the plane of culture, all of this is only heightened by symbolic thought and action. Death is mediated by ritual, by grief, by concepts of afterlife and ancestor worship. Death can mean a great deal, depending on the cultural overlay of interpretation. An individual not only experiences death but can also reflect upon it. Indeed, the prospect of death can terrify a human entirely in the abstract when no specific danger is imminent at all. One can wallow in the dread and uncertainty of it, and even consider inflicting it on oneself. One can ask, to be or not to be? One can be oppressed by the weight of the realization that all that is living must die, and persist in the torment of the ever-grinning skull latent in every pleasure. A person can also heroically face this inevitability with courage or acts of self-sacrifice. Aware of suffering, one can seek its mitigation in the world. One can apply one's thought to reduce death and negative valence. People can also rationally accept death, come to peace with it as no other animal can. They can access and assess the sum total of their experience and conclude, amidst the pain of disillusion, that it was all worth it. Humans can thus go gentle or not into that good night, forking lightning as best they can with their allotted time. They can imagine heavens and Hades of every stripe, which ease their passing and gesture to a viability beyond the physical. But humans do pass, and the patterned information of the infinite richness of their egos is experienced no more by those that they leave behind. Death is thus bitterest for the most complex beings who have the depth of consciousness to taste the nuanced flavors of its bitterness. Death is the last enemy, but also the mother of beauty, a complex issue indeed. Thus, from fundamental thermodynamic laws, we see the blossoming of ever richer phenomena through novel information processing. This is how meaning evolves. In that evolution, we can find both continuity and discontinuity. New layers are not reducible to lower ones, but do build off of them. There is a thread connecting the chaotic dissolution of a whirlpool and Hamlet reflecting on the undiscovered country. It is a tenuous thread, but it meanders the labyrinth of complexity as surely as Ariadne's. In the symphonic opera of existence, meanings are the leitmotifs, appearing soft and solo at the first, then rising, growing, getting contrapuntal harmonies and spreading through the orchestra until the single melody that broke the silence thunders with a swell of ecstasy, sublimity, and awe that goes past our words. The theme of that symphony is what we call the sacred. The sacred.